Crimson Tactics: The Rise of the White Banner is finally here. It has dropped out of early access, and as a clear spiritual successor to games like Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre Reborn, it's perhaps unsurprising that this strategy RPG has a lot of mechanical depth, a lot of things going on in it that you need to wrap your mind around if you want to find success in the game. For someone like me, who's lived and breathed these games my entire life, it comes to me fairly naturally, but not everyone is an absolute freak for these types of games the way I am. So I'm here today to provide some beginner's tips to help you get into the game if you're interested in it and want to check it out, so that you can craft a better army. Let's talk about it. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and if you know anything about me, you know that, again, I'm a huge fan of strategy RPGs. It's the primary thing we talk about on this channel, and, of course, YouTube is my full-time career, and it's something that I want to keep growing as a business and as a lifestyle. So, if you could help me with that by liking the video, subscribing to my channel, considering even picking up a Patreon membership or a YouTube membership, especially Patreon, gets you day early access to videos like this. It's pretty great. That would be just absolutely the best thing you could do for me, honestly. It's really hard to grow on YouTube these days, especially when you do what is still considered kind of niche content given the genre that we're covering here. And I could really use all the support that I can get. Thank you so much. Getting right into the information, tip number one is a little bit of a meta one right off the bat, I know, but I wanted to quickly get this out of the way. Do yourself a favor, turn up the game speed. If you didn't know or missed it in the tutorial, there's a little set of arrows in the top right of the screen. By clicking these, you can turn up the game's speed in combat, and that is an absolute lifesaver. The game can be quite slow at base, and I don't want that to turn you off of what is an otherwise excellent gameplay experience. So crank that speed up and get to the gameplay. Moving on to the actual, game information now. One of the really cool aspects of Crimson Tactics is its magic system, in that pretty much anyone can learn magic. Now, this doesn't mean that your whole party is going to be slinging fireballs around. Stats and gear, as well as class restrictions, do still have a big impact on your damage and what spells you can wield. But what it does mean is that you can deck everyone out with buff spells to complement their playstyles. After all, the opening turns of a battle rarely see blood spilled, so instead of just charging blindly at the enemy, why not buff up? Similarly to Tactics Ogre Reborn, where having attack buff items on your warriors and berserkers, magic buff items on your wizards and witches was the norm, here you can equip those physical attackers with Cruel Strength to buff their attack, or Divine Illumination to buff your mage's spells. Regardless of the strategy you intend to employ, there's a buff spell to match it, and as pretty much any character will start a battle with enough MP to cast one of these spells on turn 1, it's a no-brainer. The only caveat is that, unless the character in question is a mage, you have to match the element of the character to the element of the buff spell you want them to use. But really, let's ask ourselves a serious question here. What self-respecting edgelord wouldn't want all their greatsword-wielding warriors to be the dark element, even if it didn't let them use the strength buff spell, right? Right. Speaking of buff spells, though, have you ever used the ultimate support build in Final Fantasy Tactics? A mage wielding both white magic and a time magic to provide your team with healing, defense and resistance buffs, resurrections, and even increased speed through spells like haste? It's incredibly strong, as you can probably imagine, but it takes a while to get online with all the spells and class levels that you need to get. Well, what if I told you you could get a similar build online in the very first fight after you get your own party to customize in Crimson Tactics? It's possible, thanks to the Energize spell. This buff spell, belonging to the lightning element of spells, grants Quickened to the target for 2 turns, reducing their WT or their wait time, and functionally granting them the haste status of Final Fantasy fame. Slap this on a priest, you've got the ultimate support build, or at least a framework for it, ready to go. But remember, in Crimson Tactics you can put magic on anybody so long as it matches their element. And let me tell you, a duelist who can energize herself to sprint into the enemy line at lightning speed is a sight to see indeed. There are some caveats as well with this because, again, it only lasts for 2 turns, so if you spend half of the battle having your team cast Energize on themselves, generally you're going to be losing damage, and it's going to drag fights out quite a bit, especially since the buff will run out faster because they're getting their turns earlier. But using it at the start of the fight to get a quick boost of speed, a quick boost of extra damage in, or having a support unit dedicated to putting it on your party throughout the fight can be very nice. So pack Energize and blitz down your enemies today. Now, the way learning skills works in Crimson Tactics, any skills you've unlocked using skill points become permanently available to the relevant character, no matter what class you switch them to. This is not an FFT situation where you need to equip the class skill, such as, say, Arts of War from Knights, onto a character for them to use their break skills. If you learn a skill, you can equip it, period. However, you can only unlock abilities to learn every few character levels. For example, on Knight, you can learn Chivalry, a skill that prevents their offensive attacks that hit in an AoE from hurting their allies at level 9, and the hardline defense skill that doubles your defense at 12. Does that mean you need to wait until you level enough to learn more skills? Not necessarily. You could probably be doing something else with that time in between levels 9 and 12. But what is that? Well, unlike similar games like Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre Reborn, classes do not level separately from characters. This means, if you were to class change your knight to, say, warrior, all of the skills that would be unlocked to learn up to your current level in warrior will be. At that point, all you need to do is gain skill points in that class, and you can permanently unlock any of those skills for use. Then, you can switch back to your main class whenever you want, and begin gaining SP and learning skills there once you've reached the right levels. You can bounce between 2 or 3 classes as you level this way, and essentially multi-class your own unique builds. It's quite fun, really. And you're making better use of your time in those kind of gap levels where you're not unlocking new skills in your current class, and still growing your character, widening the pool of their capable abilities, which is really important in a game like this. You want to stay versatile. Part of staying versatile is because you want to be able to experiment with different builds, and more than even Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics, Crimson Tactics allows you to really dig deep with character customization. After discussing the variety of magic alone, I'm sure you're starting to see that, but there's still way more that goes into these systems. For example, the difference between a knight with a sword, shield, and defensive earth magic versus a knight with a sweeping greatsword, stunning strike, and the dark element cruel strength buff spell is very significant. Then, you factor in different armor weights, or even weird stuff like using an offhand book instead of a shield to block magic damage instead of physical damage, and you can probably start to see how this system can get very wide and very deep very fast. Each class has tons of versatility just within it before you start bringing in skills from other classes as well. If you feel that your knights are too slow, consider switching them to lighter armor with their heavy two-handed weapons. And if your mages are getting sniped down by rangers, toss them some shields instead of offhand books to block physical damage. You can even consider packing some support magic on your own rangers to buff your mages, or increase your frontliners' movement range before they charge in. Even with just the basic starter choices of skills, spells, classes, and gear, you've got plenty of choices. Don't forgo experimentation. Speaking of build variety, have you considered giving your holy woman a Glock? Or the 7th century version anyway, and the crossbow? Well, if you haven't, you should. Priests are actually pretty nasty shots in Crimson Tactics, as it turns out, giving them the ability to contribute chip damage or finish off weakened targets at range, while your heavy hitters focus on bigger targets. Pretty legit. As a great man once said, DPSing is just mitigating further damage, and being able to do so from range when your party doesn't necessarily need to be healed this turn is a very efficient use of your time. You aren't even really sacrificing anything to do this, as hand crossbows are fairly light, and your other gear and abilities will buff your healing sufficiently. So, send those healers to the shooting gallery. Just make sure they remember who's nice and who's not in the heat of battle, lest your favorite knight wind up with a bolt to the back of the neck. Number 7 is check the crafting system regularly, and this might seem like a simple one, but it's one that I feel is important to emphasize nonetheless. Don't discount the crafting system. As early as I am in the game, there's nothing spectacularly cool in it, sure, but what is there is all the same equipment that I can buy, but for a fraction of the cost as long as I have the raw materials to make it. This has allowed me to make some nice weapons and armor for my party without spending an arm and a leg to acquire it, and we're looking at 4 to 5 items needing to be upgraded per character before you start looking at accessories. Those savings will absolutely rack up. It's very valuable. This is doubly so, considering the need to buy consumables like potions and revives, as well as grimoires to teach your army the ever-important spells that we were talking about earlier. Speaking of those consumables, by the way, you can also mix potions and revives yourself with the materials you find, so you can save some cash there too. Just pop in to visit the blacksmith and the potion master semi-regularly, see what savings await. And finally, number 8, let enemies expire for maximum loot. But where do you get all these raw materials for crafting? To say nothing of more class marks or even tarot cards to buff your stats, well, from the corpses of your enemies, of course. The grisly art of battlefield looting may not be the most honorable practice to engage in, but when you're a scrappy rebel force trying to save your homeland, beggars can't really be choosers. So, to maximize your earnings on the battlefield, try to allow as many enemies as possible to expire so they drop whatever they've got in their pockets. To do this, you must down an enemy, then let 3 turns expire. As these turns pass, you'll see the dots on the marker above their body reduce from 3 to 2 to 1, at which point they'll vanish and leave behind a bag of treasure and materials or a tarot card. Move a unit on top of this loot, or just finish the battle without anyone picking it up, and all of it will be added to your inventory. To get the most bang for your buck, either let one unit survive until the rest of his friends permanently leave this mortal coil, ensuring you keep that one unit trapped between your units, lest he lose his nerve and try to flee the battle, or focus one unit down at a time to ensure that their death timers start as quickly as possible. God, reading it back after writing it, this section is really evil, good lord.
Freaking horrible.
Moving on, you'll see the collection of everything you found at the end of a mission, and if you've done your job right, the list should be bigger than you can even reasonably keep track of. Truly a king's ransom, and you need every bit. So, engage in war crimes and torture your enemies for profit! In games only, please. Don't demonetize me or nuke me in the algo, YouTube. It's strategy, damn it! Okay, and there we have it, folks. My first 8 tips for new players in Crimson Tactics, The Rise of the White Banner. There's a lot to break down in this one, and I'm sure there will only be more as I get further into the game, so if there's a topic that you'd like me to cover, or something that you have questions about, let me know in the comments, and I may just make a video on it. Thank you for all the support, as always, and I hope you're enjoying Crimson Tactics. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Have a good night, stay safe and healthy out there, and remember, be good to each other. Bye now.